Hi, everybody. How are you tonight? I'm doing fine. I see Dolores is here. Hi, Dolores. How are you? If you could do a little sharing, please do. I haven't had much chance to share because I was a little late getting started. I see you're both on Facebook and on YouTube. Hi, Lana. How you doing? Okay, 4 hearts on Facebook. That's pretty good. Okay, let's get started because we have a lot of news and things that have been happening to cover. So let's hope we get some other people joining us as we go forward. Or if not, then not. So the relief bill has been beginning to take shape. The $1.9 trillion relief bill. That is. For a minute there, I thought I wasn't going to be able to get to the site. But I guess it did come through after all. So this is from Vox. Okay, it's by Emily Stewart, published on February 18th. Congress is writing up Biden's stimulus plan. Here's what's in it. I'm just going to go over it in a sketchy way. Your sound is on, honey.
I know, I'm trying to do it.
We're beginning to see what the $1.9 trillion COVID-19 stimulus package might actually look like. It includes $1,400 stimulus checks for those making up to $75,000, $400 expanded weekly unemployment insurance benefits through August 29th. So notice the first rumors we heard was that it was going to be till the end of September, which is the end of the fiscal year, which is the logical time to have this, but now it's been pushed back to August 29th. Why? Because they don't want to go over 1.9 trillion. See? They picked an arbitrary number, and again, they're sticking with the arbitrary number, even though now they have to roll back the unemployment insurance protection by a month. As if they had any real financial concerns. No. They're just playing the same old game of looking at numbers that, well, once we state a number, we got to stick with the number. You know, we can't just adjust to reality. We just have to stick with the number, and we don't have the money to go any higher than that number because, of course, we couldn't have been wrong the first time. And as it stands now, increasing the minimum wage to $15 by 2025. Also contains a restaurant rescue fund, money for reopening schools, and Democrats' long sought after funding for state and local governments. Of course, as you know by now, Biden is making noises like the minimum wage will not survive in this bill. I don't know how he knows that. I don't think it entirely depends on him. Seems to me if Bernie Sanders digs in his feet and he says no bill without the $15 an hour minimum wage in it, that then they're going to have to go along with Bernie Sanders or get no bill. But it seems to me that if Joe Manchin can threaten Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders can threaten Joe Biden just as well. The expanded weekly unemployment benefits are currently set at $300 and they expire on March 14th. So that's another deadline. They're trying to get this bill done by March 14th so that the unemployed are covered. The bill also contains some benefits for freelancers and contractors, unemployment benefits, along with extended state benefits for the same period. But as I noted, it shaves a month off Biden's proposal. Locke says there are important questions as to whether a minimum wage hike can get through the reconciliation process and make it past the parliamentarian in the Senate. But for now, at least, the Democrats are determined to fight for it. If they were really determined to fight for it, they'd let the parliamentarian know that if he or she makes any trouble, that's it. Somebody else will be hired as the parliamentarian. Or they could let it be known that Harris is just going to put her foot down and not listen to whatever the parliamentarian says. Either way of doing it would be fine. But if the parliamentarian were to lose their job over this, I would not feel a bit sorry for the parliamentarian, because there seems to be no logical reason why the minimum wage could not be included in the reconciliation bill, because according to CBO, it certainly does have an impact on the budget, which is the requirement. So there is that. So what else? This is nowhere close to a done deal, says the article. Much can still change about what's in the final bill. In both the House and the Senate, a more bipartisan deal, which would look pretty different from this one, isn't yet entirely off the table. I hope it's entirely off the table, because a more bipartisan deal is sure to be a worse deal for people. And while the Senate looks likely to work from the House bill, says the article, since they were tied up with impeachment and cabinet confirmations, they're likely to make amendments and changes to it, after which the legislation would then be bounced back to the House. The Senate also has to keep in mind the rules governing what can be done through the reconciliation. So there's that. Here's what's in the bill so far. From the Education and Labor Committee, there's money for school reopening and higher education. The bill calls for $130 billion for that, directing funds towards areas such as ventilation system upgrades, reduced class sizes, and personal protective equipment to help make schools safer, and ensures the money is directed towards public schools. That, of course, is good. Schools are required to put 20% of the money towards learning loss, meaning efforts to make up the lost ground with students who miss school. It also directs $40 billion in grants to higher education, requires institutions that receive funding to dedicate at least half of it to emergency financial aid grants for students. At for-profit higher education institutions, 100% of allocations have to go to student aid. Now, the proposal would put $39 billion towards a grant program for child care providers, ordering them to prioritize relief for families having a hard time covering tuition, as well as $1 billion for the Head Start program. Then there are funds for health care access, The bill provides subsidies for COBRA. That's the program to continue health coverage when people lose their jobs, with a premium reduction of 85% through September. That's, of course, a very expensive way to support people who've lost their health insurance. Would have been a lot cheaper just to give them Medicare. A lot cheaper. Of course, the insurance companies wouldn't have liked that, and Biden wants to please his donors, as do many of the people in Congress also. Then there's food assistance and resources for families and children. House bill puts $5 billion more into an existing pandemic EBT program to help low-income families with food assistance during the school year and the summer, as well as additional programs for WIC, which supports women and children. It also expands the age of eligibility for the Child and Adult Care Food Program and emergency homeless shelters for young adults, and puts millions of dollars towards programs meant to address child abuse and neglect and domestic violence. There's also $4.5 billion into the low-income home energy assistance program to help families cover the cost of heating and cooling their homes. And there's funds for older Americans. The bill invests $1.4 billion in programs for older adults under the Older Americans Act, including nutrition programs, support services, and disease prevention programs. Then, of course, there's the minimum wage of $15 an hour. The CBO estimates that will increase wages for 27 million workers. Some Democrats say no, it will raise wages for 32 million workers. There's some debate as to whether this provision can be done through reconciliation, but nobody knows why. The bill also puts $150 million, no, I just added that, toward the Department of Labor for the implementation of COVID-19 related worker protection programs. In the area of transportation and infrastructure from that committee, there's disaster relief. The bill has in its $50 billion for reimbursing state, local, tribal, and territorial governments for their COVID-19 response expenses, including vaccinations, PPE, National Guard deployment, and disinfecting public facilities. Then on to public transit and transportation, there's $30 billion to public transit, which has seen a huge drop in ridership during the pandemic, $8 billion to airports, $3 billion to aerospace manufacturing for temporary payroll support, and $1.5 billion to Amtrak for payrolls and restoring long-distance service. It also puts $3 billion towards the Economic Development Administration, which provides grants to economically distressed communities meant to help respond to economic harm done by the pandemic. Then there's unemployment insurance. And it says this is one provision to watch. Oh, by the way, this last Ways and Means, which had the unemployment insurance going through August 29th, the article says that is one to watch because Biden wants that through September. So maybe there'll be some moves in the Senate to get him that through September. That would be good. It's much better if it goes through September than only through the end of August. The bill also directs $2 billion to the Department of Labor to shore up unemployment systems. That's probably something greatly needed. It also extends the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program for self-employed and contractors and the Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation Program, which tacks on extra weeks of state benefits through August 29th. Then there are the stimulus checks for those earning up to $75,000, and then they gradually go down to zero between $75,000 and $100,000 for individuals and $200,000 for couples. It also includes $1,400 for child and adult dependents, including college students and disabled adults. And it notes that adult dependents have been excluded from previous stimulus payments, but not excluded from this one. There are tax credits. The bill expands the child tax credit to $3,000 per child up to age 17 and $3,600 for children under age 6 for 2021. And there are a number of other provisions to this part of the bill. And the earned income credit has been expanded. It reduces the minimum wage to claim the credit from 25 to 19. And it nearly triples the maximum credit from $543 to $1,402. So that sounds pretty good. There's child care assistance programs. The bill increases funding for the child care entitlement to states, which gives states funding for child care for low-income families to over $3.5 billion per year, and suspends the required state match on new funds for fiscal year 2021 and 2022, which is good because the states don't have the ability to match for those years since the states have been hit so hard in their tax pocketbook by COVID. A top priority of Ways and Means Chair the chair is Richie Neal, of Massachusetts. This portion of the bill would bail out multi-employer pension plans, which are pensions created through an agreement between at least two employers and a union. Neal estimates that about 10 million Americans are participants in these kinds of pension plans, and more than 1 million of them are participating in plans that are running out of money. So this is a big thing for them. From the Small Business Committee, there are amendments to the Paycheck Protection Program. The bill expands eligibility for the PPP for small businesses to include nonprofits with certain restrictions, and to online news publishers also with certain restrictions. They can have more than one location, but they can't have more than 500 employees per location. So that means that quite a few pretty large corporations will be able to fit in and get some of this money. It also puts an additional $7.25 billion toward the PPP, increasing the program level to $813.7 billion from $806.4 billion. Then there are funds for economic disaster loans. The bill directs $15 billion towards the economic injury disaster loan program for businesses that were impacted by the pandemic. It also puts $1.25 billion towards the SBA's program for shuttered venue operators that was established in the December stimulus. And there's a revitalization fund for restaurants, $25 billion. towards a new program at the SBA that would support by restaurants. $5 billion of which will be set aside for businesses with under $500,000 in revenue in 2019. The industry losses are estimated by the article to be $240 billion. Wow. Under Energy and Commerce, there's a good deal of money for vaccines, testing, and tracing. $46 billion to HHS to detect, diagnose, trace, and monitor COVID-19. $7.5 billion for the CDC to promote, monitor, and track COVID-19 vaccines. $1 billion for the CDC to strengthen confidence in the vaccine. In other words, propaganda. And $5.2 billion to HHS to support more vaccine research and manufacturing. And it puts $500 million towards helping the CDC track COVID-19 hotspots and $750 million towards its efforts to combat COVID-19 around the world. Then there's money for the public health, the workforce, $7.6 billion to HHS, and an additional $100 million for the Medical Reserve Corps, which is a network of volunteers to support the emergency response efforts. And there are other public health investments, $7.6 billion into community health centers, one of Bernie's favorites, for coronavirus-related activities, and $1.8 billion towards HHS for coronavirus tests, and for PPE and vaccines for staff and people living in congregate settings. Tribal health programs, $6 billion for those. In the category of mental health and substance abuse, $3.5 billion towards block grant programs for mental health and substance abuse prevention and treatment, as well as millions more towards other programs related to mental health and substance abuse. Under energy assistance, the bill directs $4.5 billion to HHS to help low-income people pay their energy and water bills. And under the heading of internet connectivity, the bill establishes a $7.6 billion emergency connectivity fund to be enacted by the Federal Communications Commission to expand internet connectivity to students and teachers during the pandemic. That probably will be money well spent as well. Then under financial services, under that committee, there's Defense Production Act spending. Bill puts $10 billion towards spending under the DPA, which allows the federal government to make requests to private industry in times of emergency. The funds would help the president in increase production of certain materials, namely those needed to respond to the COVID-19 crisis, including PPE, vaccines, and tests. Under the rental assistance category, Democrats are aiming to put $25 billion towards emergency assistance to renters. They would put $19 billion towards Treasury for rental and utility assistance, and an additional $5 billion towards emergency housing choice vouchers for people at risk of homelessness, domestic violence survivors, and human trafficking victims to help get them stable housing. The bill also aims to put money towards people living on USDA subsidized properties and towards programs of help to Native Americans, Hawaiians, and Alaskan Natives with housing. Homelessness funding, there's $5 billion in assistance to help communities provide shelter to the homeless. Under homeowner assistance, the bill would direct nearly $10 billion towards states, territories, and tribes to provide assistance to homeowners on fronts such as mortgage payments and property taxes. Under small business credits, the bill puts $10 billion towards the state small business credit initiative, which lawmakers say would support up to $100 billion in financing for small businesses through state, territorial, and tribal programs. That sounds like a leverage thing of 10-1 in loans. Some funds will be directed specifically towards minority-owned businesses, but businesses owned by those who are economically disadvantaged, and tribal government programs. There's also support for the airline industry, $15 billion towards a payroll support program established under the CARES Act that was supposed to help airline workers. This was not in Biden's plan, but it looks like Sarah Nelson got something for her union again, which is good. Food supply chains and agriculture. The bill puts an additional $3.6 billion towards the USDA for buying and distributing food and agricultural commodities and making grants and loans to farmers. It also provides $500 million in grants for rural health care and farm loan assistance for disadvantaged farmers and ranchers, including those who have historically been discriminated against by the USDA. It increases benefits for SNAP, a 15% increase in SNAP benefits through September 30th, 2021. It also directs funds towards technological improvements for the program. Under the Veterans Affairs Committee, we have claims and appeals funding. The bill directs $272 million in the Department of Veterans Affairs. Also for veteran medical care and health needs, the bill puts $13.5 billion towards the VA for providing healthcare services and support to veterans, including those whose care has been delayed, become more expensive, or have been otherwise affected by the pandemic. There's funding for homes for state veterans' homes. Those are facilities that provide care for veterans, whether nursing homes, at-home help, or adult daycare. And the bill puts funding towards them in two ways. $500 million for the VA to send money to states to upgrade and enhance homes, and $250 million in one-time emergency payments to support facilities. There's some more VA funding, but it's relatively small, for supply chain modernization efforts and some other odds and ends. The Oversight Committee is providing state, local, tribal, and territorial funding, $350 billion total towards state, local, tribal, and territorial funding, split into 60% for states and 40% for localities. I won't go through that in detail. It's a nice chunk, of funding. State and local government funding has been a major sticking point for Republicans. If Democrats are able to pass this through reconciliation, they can bypass opposition from the GOP. There's emergency leave for federal and postal workers. The bill directs $570 million in emergency leave for federal employees and postal workers. And the bill puts $117 million towards oversight entities, namely the Government Accountability Office and the Pandemic Response and Accountability Committee, to oversee pandemic relief funds. So the article claims Democrats are trying to go fast and go big. They have a deadline for passing the bill in mind because they don't want expanded unemployment insurance to dry up in mid-March. So they're trying to get this out of the House really within the next week, by February 27th, I suspect. Donald Trump waited till the very last minute to sign a $900 billion stimulus package into law in December, and that threw a wrench in benefits for many workers and screwed up the inner workings of unemployment administration in many states. He knew what he was doing. This time around, Dems appear determined to get their legislation done on time. That has entailed simultaneously dealing with Trump's impeachment trial, which ended in acquittal on February 13th, and getting Biden's nominees confirmed in a press conference with Senate Democrats on February 9th. Chuck Schumer insisted they could get it all done. The bottom line is simple. The Senate is moving full steam ahead on a bold plan to get this country out of the crisis, to speed vaccination distribution, and blah, blah, blah. More like that. There was a correction to the article on February 19th. A previous version of this story misstated the Democrats' estimate for how many workers would have their earnings increased with a $15 an hour minimum wage. So that's why it was corrected, I guess, from 27 million to 32 million. So that's what's in the program. Sounds pretty good on the surface, but of course, you have to be an expert in each of these areas to know whether the money allocated is really enough or not, or whether they've gone too short, or what they've done. Certainly in certain areas, they're short. In certain areas, they're probably long. But I'm not in a position to evaluate that for each of those areas, and I don't know anybody who is. So I've just been satisfied with trying to tell you what is in the bill so you have some expectations. Looks like, but Nancy Pelosi is going to accept what's coming from the committees. So the bill is going to total $1.9 trillion, and it's going to contain the various things we have talked about based on this Vox article. So let us hasten now to some of the issues that we're going to talk about, some of the other issues that are important. Something significant was done, hopefully significant, was done by Ayanna Pressley this week. She unveiled a federal jobs guarantee bill. And there's a picture of her good self. Title of the article is Demanding, quote, dignified work and a living wage as legal rights. Ayanna Pressley unveils jobs guarantee resolution. So this is a resolution. It's not a bill. It's an HRES. It's not an HR. That means that there needs to be an HR and there needs to be appropriations for the HR. This bill, or I should say, this article was written by Jake Johnson, their staff writer, on the 18th. Pressley had to say is that, quote, it's long past time to pursue bold, intentional policies that affirm equity and recognize the dignity and the humanity of all people, unquote. An objective that requires sweeping legislative action, not mere tinkering by the Federal Reserve. And quote again, it's time to establish a legal right to a job for all people in America. The federal job guarantee is an important investment in the American people, our communities, and an equitable economy that works for all. It affirms the right to meaningful, dignified work and living wage. Now, the resolution's in 16 pages. I've given you a link to it. It invokes as inspiration the 1963 March on Washington for jobs, and freedom. And it harkens back to the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom in 1965 and to Coretta Scott King and Martin Luther King and their attempts to get a job guarantee harkens back also to Franklin Roosevelt and the Economic Bill of Rights of 1944. The Sunrise Movement Executive Director, Varshini Prakash, called the resolution, quote, a step towards a brighter future for young people, working people, and for people of color. And, quote, a vital leap towards what's needed for a Green New Deal. She also called it an opportunity for our country to step up and invest in its people rather than big corporations and fossil fuel CEOs, unquote. According to a summary released by Presley, Secretary of Labor would direct Treasury funds to local employment offices to manage job guarantee projects and match job seekers to projects, as well as cover any related capital and administrative costs. Says the summary. The program would be geared towards ensuring the delivery of high-quality professional care to children, seniors, and others in need of long-term support in family-based, informal, and formal settings, augmenting the staffing of public education, early childhood learning, including Head Start and preschool, strengthening public after-school programs, libraries, and recreational programs to provide lifelong learning and enrichment for people of all ages, implementing community infrastructure and improvement projects that revitalize neighborhoods and increase accessibility, expanding emergency preparedness and relief and recovery from natural and community disasters, including public health, natural disasters, and environmental emergencies. Producing works of art and documentation of American history akin to the WPA's Federal Arts Project, implementing environmental conservation, remediation, and sustainability initiatives, and increasing the energy efficiency of buildings and our housing stock to address climate change. By rehabilitating and retrofitting our existing affordable housing stock to ensure safe, affordable, accessible, quality homes, supporting for the development of new affordable housing and social housing to address the nation's housing crisis, and other projects that address public needs and can be implemented quickly. At a time when 28% of full-time workers are in less than $15 per hour, a job guarantee would set a new standard for quality jobs, pressuring low-wage employers to increase by wages and benefits. The summary reads, quote, by hiring workers in the midst of a downturn, unquote, document continues, a permanent job guarantee would operate as an automatic stabilizer, maintaining consumer spending and protecting us from prolonged recessions and jobless recoveries, which would make the economy more resilient as well as more inclusive. I think what Bernie should do is to incorporate this resolution as a part of the reconciliation bill. Then they could take out the minimum wage provision. The reason why they could do that is because if everybody has a federal job guarantee that's guaranteed at a salary of $15 per hour, that would become a de facto minimum wage. And we wouldn't have to fight with Joe Manchin. In fact, I think he said on other occasions that he likes it when people work. So he might actually favor a federal job guarantee, as long as it's not a minimum wage for the private sector.
$9.50.
Huh?
I thought it was around, his suggestion was around $9.
Whose suggestion?
Nancy, Joe,
He had different suggestions for different points in time for different states. I think his latest is that he might go as high as $13 an hour by 2025. But that's neither here nor there in the sense that what the Presley bill is calling for is $15 per hour. Oh, and by the way, I think the Presley bill doesn't have a provision in it that says that it has to happen in 2025. So I think what she's calling for is $15 an hour in a federal job guarantee right now. And that would take care of the issue of whether people had to wait till 2025 in order to get there. I thought it would be useful to put up, for a moment anyway, the actual HRES for you to see. Let me share it. Share the screen. There we go. The HRES. Here it is. 117 Congress. What I thought was very interesting about it, and very odd, it's only a 16-page bill, by the way. Okay, you see, well, it's not a bill, as I said. It's an HRES. But it's only 16 pages. Okay. Now, she starts off the bill by giving all the reasons for the bill. Each reasons clause starts with a whereas, such as whereas Article 23 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights recognizes that everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work, and to protection against unemployment. Then she goes on with whereases in this vein. Page 2, including, whereas a job guarantee is essential to any effort to close the racial and gender income, and wealth gap, whereas the United States has experienced decades of increasing inequality, racial economic exclusion, and inequity, stagnant wages, declining union membership, and deteriorating workplace protections and conditions. And she keeps on going through page 3 with the whereases. I mean, it's, beautiful in its own way. She puts in every misfortune which has been befalling Americans for the last 4 decades. A lot of this is directed at inequality. It's a series of reasons for enacting the job guarantee. It's just beautiful. And it goes on for 8 pages, if I recall correctly. I'm sorry, it goes on till page 7. Now, therefore, be it resolved that it is the sense of the House of Representatives that it is the duty of a federal government to create a job guarantee. And then she goes on with the twos, to finally eliminate the moral and economic scourge of involuntary unemployment, to establish a true full employment society in which anyone who wants to take paid work in the service of the community and the environment has ample opportunities to do so, to collectively achieve the greatest possible level of socially and ecologically sustainable prosperity, The only criticism I have of this is that it's at $15 an hour instead of at a living wage, and cost adjustments for every local area that has cost of living above the lowest cost of living area in the United States. Okay, but you know my rap on that. I don't think $15 is enough anymore, but of course, it's the order of the day to save the $15. So she has about 8 pages of what should go into this bill. And that's it. It's nice, it's clean, it's explicit, it's the heart of a bill. I mean, it's just great. Okay, so I'm going to leave it to you to read. I've provided the link in the description. And I'm going to go on to the next piece. I thought that was very significant. It might be just forgotten, but who knows? Maybe Bernie will have the guts to pick it up and put it into the Senate bill. I hope so. But next, I mean, I should have said I can dream, can't I? A little bit. Then there's the student debt issue, of course, which Biden has brought to the floor in an unutterably stupid way, as I've been saying. This was published on February 17th, Common Dreams, by Kenny Stansel. Biden, quote, can and must go big, unquote, say progressives, urging the president to cancel student debt. After he dismissed the idea of canceling $50,000 of student loan debt per borrower through executive action, Joe Biden on Wednesday faced a barrage of criticisms from activists and lawmakers on the progressive side who called for putting more pressure on the president to use every power at his disposal to provide relief to more than 40 million Americans saddled with a combined $1.7 trillion in student debt. Does Biden have the authority to cancel student debt with the stroke of a pen, unquote, asked Presley on Tuesday night, when he said he will not forgive $50,000 per borrower, even though 60% of registered voters support the move? Yes, she answered, linking to a video explaining why the Biden administration has the legal authority under the Higher Education Act of 1965 to cancel federally held student debt, as well as a petition calling for him to issue an executive order doing so. So there's no doubt the authority exists, but Presley was not alone in calling on him to do this. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Elizabeth Warren, and Chuck Schumer all challenged his false narrative about who would benefit from the measure and encouraged advocates to, as Ocasio-Cortez put it, keep on pushing. And Ocasio-Cortez provided a helpful link to your representative's info in her tweet. And Dave Dayen tweeted that the issue is not going away. He actually retweeted Senator Warren's statement saying that she and Chuck Schumer were urging him to act. And they put forward their the joint statement on student debt. Biden got a lot of denunciations for saying what he did, of course. There was a tweet by Ben Jealous in the classic mode: cancel period, student period, debt period, now period, urging him to reintroduce a visionary debt cancellation plan for federal borrowers. Yeah, Jamal Bowman asked him to do that too. And Charles Booker said cancel every penny of student debt. Go big. John Fetterman of Pennsylvania said, if we got trillions to spend on bailing out big banks and the 1%, we got to take action to cancel student loan debt. In Pennsylvania, we have the third highest rate of student loan debt in the United States. The average debt is $39K. It's time to do what's right and cancel student loan debt, said Fetterman. Using her own story, which included being victimized by the predatory for-profit college industry before attending a public university. I told you a story about that in the last in Thursday's live stream. As an example, Representative Ilhan Omar highlighted how student debt cancellation, far from solving, quote, a rich kid problem, would advance economic and racial justice.
They should tell Biden that the rich people don't take out loans.
So Barney said everybody got to tell Biden rich people don't take out the loans. Contrary to his false claims that the biggest of the beneficiaries would be the elite graduates of Ivy League institutions, student loan forgiveness would be most beneficial to low and middle income households, especially Black and brown Americans disproportionately burdened by debt. Okay, and Amira Hassan tweeted, actually she retweeted something by Michael Stratford, and she said, he does have the power to cancel student debt. Early childhood education is not funded by student debt. Debt burden is debt burden regardless of the school people attend. I went to a public university and I still walked out with debt because my family is poor. That's in caps. So the roses that we've had since the Wednesday before Valentine's Day are now on their last legs.
Yeah.
They were orange. They now seem to be
Pale pink.
Pale pink. But they lasted a very long time. Trader Joe's has high quality roses. Yeah. And Mondale Jones tweeted, he said $50K in student debt cancellation, $2K monthly survival checks, and $15 an hour minimum wage. We can and must go big. The American people are counting on us. And the Americans for Financial Reform said far more than $10,000 in cancellation is required to provide aid that 44 million families and the economy need. Ed Markey said on Wednesday, he tweeted, that Biden has the authority to issue an executive order that will cancel $50,000 of student loan debt for every borrower. So Biden's lying, right? He lied to us. It will be an act of justice, economic stimulus, and urgently needed relief all at once. and I urge him to act now. According to White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, the Biden administration is waiting to conduct a legal review of its debt cancellation authority, quote, until after Attorney General designate Garland has been confirmed by the Senate. That's just a stall. He thinks it's going to go away. He knows it's legal. While progressive lawmakers are urging their constituents to push Biden to take action, Jayapal said that if the president won't do it, then we must deliver in Congress. 45 million people are in need of our help. And she is dead right about that. So up next is an excellent piece by Margaret Flowers, which I picked up at Truth Out. If you're not familiar with Margaret Flowers, she is one of the leading authorities in the country on the Medicare for All program. She's been advocating for Medicare for All, striking for it, protesting for it, studying it for ages, and ages, fighting for it in the it's roughly 12 years, but since we met her here in D.C. at one of her protests. So the title of this article is Biden's Health Plan Shifts Even More Public Money into Private Hands. And she points out, as the American Rescue Plan winds its way through Congress, some progressives are hailing its health provisions as the greatest expansion of the Affordable Care Act in 10 years, while conservatives are claiming that it is a slippery slope to a national Medicare for All system. Democrats have decided to forego seeking Republican support for President Biden's $1.9 trillion promise of relief to those suffering from COVID-19 pandemic and recession by using the reconciliation process. This has Republicans worried that the legislation will be used to advance the progressive agenda to expand government health programs. However, at the end of the day, while the bill may be used to strengthen some of the provisions in the ACA, it will not move the United States healthcare system any closer to the popular national improved Medicare for All system that we need. It is more likely to enrich private health insurers and delay broader healthcare reform. To understand why, it's important to note the ACA, passed in 2010, was crafted to prevent national improved Medicare for All, not to create a path toward it. Following the financial crash of 2008, nearly 50 million people in the U.S. did not have health insurance, primarily because the premiums were unaffordable. Something had to be done, and public support for a single-payer healthcare system, which would replace private health insurance with a universal Medicare-like system, was growing. The medical industrial complex consisting the private health insurance, pharmaceutical, hospital, and other related corporations viewed single-payer as a threat to the industry's bottom line and worked overtime to stop it. Health industry corporations and trade groups donated heavily to campaigns for federal office in 2008 and invested billions in lobbyists to shape the ACA in their favor. The Center for Public Integrity reports a total of $3.47 billion was spent to double the number of lobbyists in Washington, healthcare lobbyists in Washington. In 2009, There were 8 lobbyists per member of Congress. Millions were also spent on PR campaigns to portray Medicare for all negatively, and to convince people that what they really wanted was a choice of health insurance. And progressive organizations also played a role in preventing national Medicare for all. Tens of millions of dollars were donated to establish a front group called Healthcare for America Now, HCAN. Tens of millions of dollars indeed. There's something like $20 million given by George Soros's foundation to HCAN. That's in large part how it got its money, which was intentionally given a name similar to the national grassroots Medicare for All, Healthcare Now. HCAN convinced advocates for universal health care that a single-payer system was not achievable, and that a more practical demand would be a public health insurance plan called a, quote, public option, unquote. It worked, and progressives became the loudest defenders of a bill that former Cigna executive Wendell Potter renamed the, quote, Private Insurance Profit Protection and Enhancement Act, unquote, even though it didn't include a public option. The ACA made for-profit healthcare more powerful, while more people in the United States gained health insurance because of the ACA. The biggest winners were private health insurance, pharmaceutical companies, and large hospital corporations. Private health insurance insisted throughout the reform process that people be mandated to purchase their plans, which is what the ACA did. The only way for the government to achieve that was to provide subsidies to cover health insurance premiums and out-of-pocket costs. For this, private insurers received hundreds of billions of public dollars each year. Despite this high spending, the private health insurance expansion only covered about 1/3 of the newly insured, around 7 million people. Can you imagine that? But the marketplace, the exchanges, only covered around 7 million people. All this fuss, only 7 million people covered. The vast majority of those who gained coverage did so through the Medicaid expansion. So 14 million through the Medicaid expansion, because coverage was only expanded by about 21 million when all was said and done, if I'm not mistaken. The vast majority of those who gained coverage did so through the Medicaid expansion, but even this enriched private insurance corporations. Since the passage of the ACA, the proportion of people in public health insurances, both Medicare and Medicaid, that are run by private health insurers, has soared so that the major health insurers now receive most of their revenue from the government. Pharmaceutical corporations are also benefited, so why don't we cut out the middleman? Cut out the middleman. They get it from the government anyway, so cut them out so we can deal directly with the government. Pharmaceutical corporations also benefit. Who wants to make the insurance executives rich? Not I. Pharmaceutical corporations also benefited. The increased number of people with health insurance expanded their market. At the same time, no controls were implemented to limit the prices of drugs. The rise in pharmaceutical profits as a result of the ACA far outstripped those of the health insurance and hospital industries. And the ACA unleashed a wave of measures and acquisitions throughout the medical industrial complex. Hospitals consolidated into large chains and bought up physician practices and health facilities. These mergers were an intended outcome of the ACA under the belief that consolidation would lead to greater efficiency and lower prices. It's the usual neoliberal bullshit. No, she didn't say that. Instead, the mergers drove up healthcare costs, and these institutions now wield greater bargaining power. The ACA ultimately made the for-profit parts of the U.S. healthcare system more powerful. And these are the industries we must take on to solve the healthcare crisis. Time to stop throwing money at a failed system, says Margaret. Prior to the pandemic, the number of people in the United States without health insurance was about 30 million. That number has been rising steadily since 2017, especially for the people aged 18 to 64. Millions more people lost their health insurance in 2020 due to the recession and pandemic, either because they lost their jobs and because they could no longer afford the premiums. The current number of people uninsured is unknown, but a recent poll found that nearly 30% of people in the United States lost their health insurance in 2020, and less than half of them actually regained it. So 15% of people in the United States who had been covered lost their health insurance. That means. So what is that? 30 million people, maybe? I don't know. Healthcare is a top issue again, as it was in 2008, says Margaret. And support for national improved Medicare for all has grown as more people are witnessing the profound flaws of a healthcare system that prioritizes profits over health. So what can we expect from the ARP, the American Rescue Plan, that is? When it comes to healthcare, we can expect more of the same. The Biden proposal, if Congress adopts it, would increase tax credits for purchasing private health insurance, expand the subsidies for out-of-pocket costs to people with higher incomes, subsidize the cost of COBRA, which is a program that allows people to maintain their employer insurance when they lose their job. It would provide more money to the health insurance exchanges and provide incentives for states to expand Medicaid. This is throwing more money at a failed system that changes nothing fundamentally. The Biden plan matches the requests of the medical industrial complex. In this press release, a coalition of private health insurers and their lobby groups, hospital corporations, physician organizations, and the Chamber of Commerce laid out their priorities. Each of their priorities would funnel more public dollars to them, either directly or indirectly, while the impact on people's ability to receive health care will fall far short of what is needed. Once again, the private industries are being bailed out and the people are being sold out. Even though Biden campaigned on a public option, it is not in the plan. The Commonwealth Fund finds that the ARP leaves out people who live in states where they don't qualify for Medicaid and don't earn enough to purchase health insurance through the exchanges. A cynic might actually believe the Biden administration is less concerned about that population, since the states that rejected the Medicaid expansion are majority Republican states. Most people who purchase private health insurance plans on the health insurance exchange will continue to face significant barriers to receiving health care. The plans have restricted networks that limit where people can go for care and have out-of-pocket costs of thousands of dollars before coverage begins. Subsidizing the cost of premiums doesn't change the fact that many people don't have the cash on hand to cover the copay or deductible required before they can get care. None of these changes move the health system closer to a national improved Medicare for all system. And in fact, the American Rescue Plan may make it more challenging to achieve it. The most obvious reason is that the ARP shifts even more public dollars into private hands. Another concern is that the ARP may result in cuts to Medicare. But Politico reports that the pay-as-you-go rules are required under the budget reconciliation process will result in reductions in spending in other programs. Restoring that funding requires passing legislation dependent on Republican support, which is not guaranteed to happen. I would say, which is almost guaranteed not to happen. Anyway, Medicare has been under attack over the past few decades, which is why advocates for single-payer health care promote improving it to expand benefits, get rid of out-of-pocket costs, and do away with the need for supplemental insurance. Further deterioration of Medicare will make it less popular and provide ammunition for opponents to scare people away from Medicare for all. Finally, the measures taken to shore up the ACA will be used as justification for not implementing broad changes to the healthcare system, just as that was true following passage of the 2010 law. It's more than a decade later, and we still don't have a Medicare for all, do we? Because the ACA was a big distraction. I said so at the time. I'm going to say so now. It would have been far, far better if the Democrats had simply not passed anything in 2010 and run on passing Medicare for all in the election of 2010. In other words, blamed it on the Republicans, on their opposition, ran on Medicare for all. They would never have lost the House had they done that. Of course, that would have required, though, that the House pass Medicare for all itself, instead of futzing around with all the compromises Obama wanted to put through. But if Medicare for all had not passed during 2009 or 2010, and the House had gone on record supporting Medicare for all, then House members could have run on Medicare for all in 2010, and we might have had it by 2011, and there might have been no Republican sweep of the federal and the state legislatures in 2010. I mean, Democrats just gave it away. It was stupid politics. Apart from the crime of not passing Medicare for all, there was the political crime of stupidity. And they're fixing to commit a similar political crime again. The American Recovery Plan will be hailed as the greatest expansion of healthcare since the passage of the ACA. Public will be told the priority will be to make the ACA work, not replace the whole system with Medicare for all. This is what happened in 2010, and as Robert Blendon states in Politico, emphasis will be put on what the ARP does to address the crisis of the pandemic through expansions of testing and vaccination, which will push the persisting overall healthcare crisis out of the discussion. We cannot solve the healthcare crisis by tweaking the current complicated for-profit healthcare system. Throwing more money at it will cover more people, but it won't cover everyone, and it won't even guarantee that people will get the healthcare they need, even with insurance. Healthcare is a public good, but not a commodity. It can't be treated as both at the same time. They contradict each other. While single-payer advocates are often told we need to achieve Medicare for all through incremental steps, the reality is it's the smallest measure that can be taken to create a healthcare system that treats healthcare as a public good. Is a national improved Medicare for all, a system that is universal, comprehensive in benefits, publicly financed and administered, and that removes profits. That will generate the savings in healthcare spending needed to cover everyone and build out the healthcare infrastructure so that everyone, everywhere in the country, has what they need to live a healthy life. President Biden has already declared his opposition to Medicare for all, as it has been for every great achievement for social change in the United States. He must build a movement that moves Medicare for all from being impossible to being inevitable. And she, of course, is dead right about that. So, one final piece. This one, a piece by Brian Cooper, I believe, on the Texas blizzard. Of course, the Texas blizzard could not be completely ignored. Texas blizzard nightmare is Republican governance in a nutshell. Yes.
Our temperature right now is 22.
Bonnie points out, the high temperature here in Virginia is 22. And Ryan Cooper says, under a picture of Ted Cruz holding a newspaper, specifically the Dallas Morning News, problems piling up. With a cartoonish background symbolizing Cancun. This was done on February 19th. The United States is still in the middle of a murderous pandemic, and Texas has been suffering its worst power blackout in at least a decade during a brutally cold winter storm. Lights were finally coming back on for many on Thursday, but still hundreds of thousands of people were without power or water. Some since Sunday night, at least 21 people have died. They were still having problems today. It looked terrible. So Senator Ted Cruz knew what to do. Quietly nipped down to Cancun for a bit of rest and relaxation. Numerous people on the plane recognized him, and the story was later confirmed by Fox News and NBC. It sparked an immediate political firestorm, and Cruz slunk back on Thursday. In a statement, he claimed he was simply following a request from his daughter, but he reportedly moved up his return date from Saturday only after the story spread. It was all darkly amusing, but what Cruz did is emblematic of the Republican Party's mode of governance. The reason Cruz felt comfortable leaving Texans to freeze solid on the sidewalks of Houston is the same reason the Texas power grid crumpled under the winter storm. Theirs is a party in which catering to the welfare of one's constituents, or indeed any kind of substantive political agenda, has been supplanted by propaganda, culture war grievance, and media theatrics. Neither he nor anybody else in a leadership position in the party knows or cares about how to build a reliable power grid. They just want to get rich owning the libs. The proximate reason the Texas grid failed was at root quite simple. It was not built to withstand freezing cold. As the Texas Tribune details, experts have been warning Texas politicians, power managers, and utility companies for years that the state is ill-prepared for a cold snap, as happened a decade ago. Quote, in 2011, Texas faced a very similar storm that froze natural gas wells and affected coal plants and wind turbines, leading to power outages across the state, unquote. Reports the Tribune. And quote again, a decade later, Texas power generators have still not made all the investments necessary to prevent plants from tripping offline during extreme cold, experts said. People have known for decades how to winterize electrical infrastructure. After all, there is still power in Canada and Finland. The reason those investments haven't been made in Texas is because it would have cost a lot of money and nobody wanted to pay for it, especially because the deregulated Texas energy grid makes it hard to pay for upgrades or extra capacity. That, in turn, must be the fault of the Texas Republican Party. Democrats have not won a statewide election in Texas since 1994. Republicans have controlled the state's House of Representatives since 2003 and its Senate since 1997. The power deregulation plan was planned by conservatives, free marketeers, signed into law by then Governor George W. Bush. All the key oversight posts have been filled by Republicans, and the Texas grid is uniquely contained within the state precisely to avoid federal regulations. The small parts of the state that are not contained in the Texas-only grid have been largely fine. It cannot possibly be the case that liberal Democrats have anything to do with this. So naturally, instead of fixing the problem, several Texas Republicans and the right-wing propaganda machine instantly blamed wind turbines and the Green New Deal. Fox News and Fox Business repeated this line dozens of times on Sean Hannity's show. Texas Governor Greg Abbott said, quote, the Green New Deal would be a deadly deal for the United States of America, unquote, and asserted that renewable power failures, quote, thrust Texas into a situation where it was lacking power on a statewide basis. And Representative Dan Crenshaw blamed the crisis on learning too many renewable energy lessons from California. Senator John Cornyn posted a Wall Street Journal op-ed making a similar argument. As I have previously written, this is a bald-faced lie. The overwhelming majority of power that got knocked out was natural gas, as well as some coal and nuclear. And the Texas grid operator expects little wind power during winter in any case. But even the fact that a few wind turbines did ice up is still the fault of the Texas Republicans. It's not like it was Earth First hippie insurgents putting turbines up across the state over the last decade. It was Texas power companies doing it because they produce cheap electricity. But when you want to harvest wind power, you have to be smart about it. Otherwise, the turbines might, to pick up a completely random example, freeze up when you need them most, just like gas and nuclear plants will do if you don't insulate them. Other Texas conservatives went even further. Former Texas Governor Rick Perry asserted, Texans would be without electricity for longer than 3 days to keep the federal government out of their business, unquote. The mayor of Colorado City, Texas, resigned after he posted a tirade on Facebook blaming individuals for losing power and water. Quote, only the strong will survive and the weak will perish, unquote, he wrote. Demands for help are, quote again, sadly a product of a socialist government when they feed people to believe that the few work and others will become dependent for handouts, unquote. Quote, by liberty, unquote, to people like this means that conservative elected officials never have to use their position or authority to do anything when their constituents are suffering and dying. That, you see, is socialism. So in a way, it probably doesn't make much of a difference that Cruz abandoned his state to the freezing Arctic winds. It's not like he was going to do anything to help them. At best, we'll get some smarmy tweets now that he's back. These days, whining is the beginning and end of Republican governance. The end. The end. I will now consider
It's going to be 6 degrees by
your comments. And Bonnie says it's going to be 6 degrees. 16 degrees by when?
11 o'clock.
By 11 p.m. That's only a half hour from now.
That's right.
How low is it going to go tonight?
Until 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning.
Is it going to go lower than 16?
No,
No?
that's not quite.
16 is going to be the lowest?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a relief. And so, here we go. Kay says, hi, Joe and all. And Dolores says, I shared to Twitter and on Messenger. Thank you, Dolores. Kay said, shared. Kay says, hi, Bonnie.
Hi.
Bonnie says, hi, Kay. Evelina says, hello, heard COVID cases going down worldwide. New variants growing, though. Yeah, for the time being, they're going down, but I wouldn't count on that. Uh, there is some good vaccine news, though. There is some good news. They seem to have found out, okay, that in the UK, that if they give people a shot, it can give them a fair amount of immunity for a long time if they wait about 21 days. Okay, in other words, uh, at first, the protection provided by the vaccine is actually more negative. Well, they can't really say it's actually more negative, okay, on an individual basis, but the situation seems to be that when you look at populations, that the incidence of cases actually goes up. That may not be directly caused by the vaccine. It may be caused by the way people behave after they've gotten the vaccine. Anyway, whatever the cause, the incidence of cases goes up for a while. It peaks at about, I think they said about 14 days. And then protection starts going up. Incidence cases starts going down. Protection starts going up until roughly at 21 days.
It's like a delay.
There's pretty good protection against severe disease, hospitalization, and being killed by COVID. Practically 100% protection. Okay, and it turns out that if you actually wait for a while to take the second vaccine, that the second vaccine then becomes like a booster shot, and you have good protection until you get the second vaccine, and you can wait even maybe 90 days to get it. So that's some of the news out of the UK, and that certainly looks good. But there is some news about the effectiveness of vaccines all over, but the new variants are growing, and we don't know what's going to happen to this mix. All we know is we got to get as many people vaccinated as we possibly can, because that seems to be the protection against further spread, which then would lead to mutations. And Carmen says, and now there's bird flu too. Evelina says, Carmen Muniz in Russia. Carmen says, too soon to open schools, too many variants still around. Kay says, I think so too, Carmen. Carmen says, this is not a good decade to have children. Evelina says, I agree. Teresa says, aloha, laugh out loud. Hi, Teresa, you in Hawaii now that you're saying, but to us, aloha? Are you vacationing in Hawaii rather than Cancun? Kay says, mine are growing, as are most of my grands, but I have great grands. Wow. I'm still a number of years away from great grands myself. Carmen says, aloha. Carmen says, let's just hope Biden and company keep sending checks in the near future, because all of this is geared towards workers, nothing for the sick to work, too sick to work, and dying. Well, there are the stimulus checks.
We haven't gotten one. I didn't get one.
Not yet, no. Barbara says, he's been in a month, nothing. That's less than Trump already. Well, he's made a number of appointments and changed back to some of the previous rules. He's done stuff like that. Yes, he has. He appears to have done some things in foreign policy which are an improvement. But yes, I agree. I was thinking that also today. He's been in a month, and where the checks that was supposed to go out immediately, that was a fail. He promised one thing, we're getting something else. There's no getting around the fact that's a fail. Okay, it's a broken promise. Yeah, because a lot of folks are becoming drunks under quarantine, and addicts are binging, ODing from the recovery checks. We still need Medicare for all more than everything. We do. Carmen says, addicts correction. Evelina says, but Medicare is paying 3 times more for medications, okay, than Medicaid, and 2 times more than VA. Such a racket. Yeah, they got to get the pharmaceutical companies under control with their pricing. Kay says, I heard that Texas is getting single payer because of the mess they have there. I haven't heard that. I haven't heard that. I wouldn't be opposed to having single payer included in the reconciliation bill, but not just for Texas, for everybody. And Teresa said, Santa said, how much went to tribal health? I forget, but it was in the billions, which is good. Anyway, check the Vox article, Teresa. The link is there. Evelina said, glad for them. And Carmen said, there's tons of child abuse going on because of COVID. Counseling and fostering is really going to be needed. I see it all the time. Kay says, me too, Evelina, but we all need that now. Barbara says, hey, whatever, PC is no longer a thing. Evelina said, I was going to say, what about the rest of the states? Kay said, exactly. And Carmen said, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Texas isn't going through more than everyone else. Other states need single payer, WTF. Kay says, not sure that is true. Heard it on YouTube today. Carmen says, oh, for Texas, it's part of the FEMA package, I think. I don't think FEMA has the money to give Texas Medicare for all. Carmen says, it's a bunch of bullshit Band-Aids. Increments, Carmen says. Evelyn says, that makes more sense. Kay says, I agree, Carmen Muniz. And Alana says, yes, very impressive. I think, okay, that Raul Carrillo helped Presley with the write-up. Hashtag job guarantee. Good. Teresa says, oh my God, that's stellar. I hope she has an MMT economist working with her. I'm sure Presley can get Stephanie Kelton on the phone. Or Pavlina. I think she can get them both on the phone if she wants to. Kay says, I need a hair trim badly. Laugh out loud. Too long to pin up anymore. Carmen says, Coretta was quite a progressive. But wasn't she? Yes, she was. Of course. She and King were both extremely progressive. Yeah, they were democratic socialists. Evelina says, if you want to do it yourself, you can bring it all forward over your head, but make a ponytail, then trim. It comes out okay. Kay says, no, I'd make a mess of it. Evelina says, it will be shorter in the front, though. Kay says, hoping to get it trimmed soon. Carmen says, more federally funded gardens would be nice. Kids could go out there instead of sitting in co-opted class all day and learn how to grow while loving the earth.
Great idea.
And Bonnie says, it's a great idea. Kay says, community organic gardens are always a good idea. Teresa says, when you plant a garden, it's good to have some decoy plants for predators. Perhaps let it serve as a graceful lose as a concession. And Kay says, but yes, it is. Carmen says, anybody doing any legislation on getting money out of politics that you know about, but Dr. Joe? Well, not really directly. There are some things to that effect in HR 1, I think, that would help, okay, in HR 1. But there's nothing like that uses Article 3, Section 2 to stop the Supreme Court from overturning it. And Evelina says, sounds like a great job. A great bill. Good job, Priscilla. Priscilla. No, Ayana. Carmen says the neoliberals are wallowing in glee that people and politicians are pacified with just $15. I don't feel pacified at all. Carmen says there needs to be an anti-paranoid campaign, paranoia campaign over automation and robotics. If Presley will include such a topic into her bill, people would be reassured there will always be good-paying jobs, and the jobs guarantee would read like a holy grail. Well, the jobs guarantee already reads like a holy grail because it doesn't matter what happens with automation. If the job guarantee is there, the job guarantee is going to be there. Jobs will be created that people can fill. Kay says, I made close to $15 an hour in the late 90s in southeast North Carolina when it was a blue state. And Teresa says, we need an election integrity reform law, paper ballot backups, make the unethical legal, promotional reputation, easy inclusion of third parties, overturn CU, voter holidays, ranked choice voting, public campaign financing, airwave time, and end gerrymandering. What did I forget? I don't know if you forgot anything, but if we do that, we need to have a provision using Article 3, Section 2 to prevent the Supreme Court from stopping it. Carmen says, I always wanted to live in North Carolina. I heard it's beautiful, but then all the regressive legislation rolled in, and I said, hold up, quote unquote. Teresa Sanders says, well, we can help it out. Kay says, I had to move out of Ohio so at least Scott could get a job in the 95. Turned out I got a few better ones too, but the GOP takeover ruined all that. Carmen says, student debt should be renamed the neoliberal handcuffs or ball and chain. Kay says, it was beautiful when we first moved there, but now it's the new Florida and overpopulated and overbuilt up. Carmen, that overpopulation might be a big part of their problem in politics too. Teresa says, is there anything in the FJG bill about the $15 wage being tied to yearly inflation? Yes, I believe there's an indexing provision in this particular bill, which, by the way, is not the way the job guarantee is supposed to go. Okay, the job guarantee is supposed to serve as an anchor for inflation. It might give a one-time boost, to wages, but if it's indexed annually to inflation, it will no longer serve as that anchor, as a force pulling down against inflation. But Deborah says, I've amused. Anyone thinks 46 will help us. He's canceled 2 of Trump's nice things, trade school for some businesses to offer an insulin price ceilings to stop price gouging. No plausible reason for this shit. Yeah, I don't think he's going to help us much. I'm not going to say there isn't going to be any help because I think they want to win in 2022. But I'm already starting to despair because they're just saying stupid things and antagonizing people needlessly with just a political stupidity. Teresa says it's been a constant slog. Wow. Too busy trying to make a living and raise a family to figure out what the hell was going on. They've dismantled the country and hamstrung at least 3 generations of Americans. I'm working on going off grid. Deborah says this new guy really stinks. Deborah says off grid is a nice thing. Carbamina says, yep, the rat race has the fat cats laughing at us. General strike probably isn't possible because society is too strapped. If the cops don't catch you, Carmen says. How much suffering do you think people will put up with? I don't know. They put up with a lot more suffering in other countries than here, like in India, let's say. That's the trouble. After a while, society breaks down, and there's only you and your family, and collective efforts can only be done sporadically. and cannot continue to put pressure on those in power. It's very difficult. Kay says, I wanted to do that in my home in southeast North Carolina, solar on the roof and expand the small room in the living room for a Franklin stove. We lived in the woods, so plenty of wood there. Deborah says, Carmen Muniz, I know someone who was for a while. Eventually you have to re-enter. Carmen says, until they end up in the hood. Carmen says, at least a sliver of freedom, that's inspirational. Kay says, Biden should get single payer and call it Biden Care, laugh out loud. Since they're not going to let us have M4A, they give us right to die. They had any sort of mercy, which would mean empathy. It seems the common thread of neoliberalism is narcissism, lack of empathy, sociopathy. Yes, I agree, Carmen. And Kay says, I agree, Carmen. And Carmen says, fled Cruz. Carmen says, guess the cowboys had to shack up with their horses and hay. Bonnie, do you guys have radiators to keep you warm? No, we don't have any radiators. We've just got heating. We have a furnace, which is right behind the door. That's about, maybe 20 feet away from me right now. And then heat is piped from the furnace going into the apartment. Okay, so we do have our own furnace. We're not allowed to open the door there, but we do have a thermostat. But yeah, there would be a problem if we lost power. There would be a problem, I think. And Teresa says it is the colonizer culture. Check out this native activist, minister, and scholar, Mark Charles. I'd like to see what you think about his expanded perspective as indigenous. His Fresno talk is a shocker. Here's a bit. Thank you for the link, Teresa. Teresa says, I wish. Alana says, Teresa in Hawaii. Interesting, haha. Did Dr. Campbell say anything about the sun increase in spring, summer will help eradicating COVID? No, he didn't say anything specifically about that that I heard, but he was also talking again the vitamin D and studies showing that the vitamin D does appear to be effective in protecting against the COVID. It's just not clear. It's not clear how much you need to take. For example, he revealed recently that his vitamin D was low in spite of the fact that he was supplementing at 4,000 IUs per day. Now, we never believed in the idea that 4,000 IUs was enough, so we've been supplementing at 6,000 IUs a day. But I haven't had a test for my vitamin D, so I think the 6,000 probably is high enough. Supposedly it's no good to take too much. But so anyway, he's had to go above the 4,000, I believe he said today or the other day. Okay, I watched a number of his installments at once.
I just read that Gates wants Facebook to let Trump back on Facebook.
So Bonnie says Gates wants Facebook to let Trump back on Facebook. Did the oh-so-wise Mr. Gates say why?
No, I didn't read that thing.
I mean, did the wise guy say why?
No. I don't know why.
Of course, he never says why. He just solemnly pronounces.
He said he was going to talk to him about it.
Carmen says, I just can't see them giving the public Medicare for all, free college, etc. As long as corporations donate to buy legislation in their favor for profits over public purpose. Well, we know what the solution is. Vote every single one of them out of office. There are third parties. Vote for them. Vote for them. Lana says, I really like Mark Charles, as Teresa has mentioned. Carmen says, I hope you have backup electric just in case. Well, how is backup electric going to help us if we don't have electricity, Carmen? Alana says, I take between 5K and 10K units a day. I just had a blood test and I'm in the good zone. In the winter, we need more if we're not in the sun, especially if we use sunscreen. As I said, we've been taking 6K per day. And Kay says, told my daughter about that vitamin D3 today. She's in Florida, but it might help her too, as she doesn't go outside much. Yes. Lana says vitamin D, 5K to 10K per day. And Kay says Bill Gates sucks. Yep. And Dolores says, where Trump is concerned, it's about ratings and dollars. Teresa says, I'm taking 5,000 IUs, and my son, who's out working in public, said he's taking 8,000 IUs. Teresa says, generator. Yeah, we can't have our own generator in here, unfortunately. Carmen says, don't listen to Gates. He couldn't even get rid of Windows and Microsoft viruses. Carmen says, laugh out loud. Sorry, dumb point. Dolores Pierce says, viruses are money makers. Yes, they are. Folks, I've caught up to you now. Any more comments? And Teresa says, hi, Lana, wherever you are, I don't see you. Oh, Lana is coming to us care of YouTube, or courtesy of YouTube. The reason why I see her is my feed in StreamYard is from both Facebook and from YouTube. So I can see both comment streams at the same time. So I can unite the comment streams. And Dolores says, thank you for a great discussion and good night all. Good night, good night. Parting is such sweet sorrow. Kay says, thank you, Joe, and all for another great discussion. I love you all. Teresa Santa says, pretty tricky. Yeah. This is pretty tricky of StreamYard. Have a good night, everybody. Teresa says, yes, it was good. Thanks, Doc, and everyone. Good night again.